Thank you all for being here to discuss Ride the Cyclone. This is Jacob Lawrence, who collaborated with Brooke Maxwell on the...
Writer Jacob Richmond was such a stranger to the musical theater world that they got his name wrong. Despite a couple awkward glances to his collaborators, Richmond never corrected them, presumably because he knew the night wasn't about him. It was about his musical, Ride the Cyclone. Nobody thought it would make it this far, and by all intents and purposes, it shouldn't have. The crowd of wealthy spectators in the audience was a far cry from the punk rock art scene in which they started. After a short screening of the musical's opening montage with a mysterious narrator, Richmond was asked the inevitable question.
So could you tell me, what is this voice and what is the story that we're going to be getting into?
The musical was nearly 8 years old at this point, and yet this question always popped up. What is Ride the Cyclone? A pretty simple question on the surface, but one that was always very difficult to answer.
So first off, explain the show to me, because it sounds like it's gonna be really fun, but then something tragic happens.
Well, it's about a bunch of kids that are in a choir together, and then we go to the fair one day and we get on a roller coaster, there's an accident, and we all die. And this happens before the show starts.
Oh no!
Yeah.
And it takes place after they're dead. They've all been given the opportunity to sing for their lives. One of them will get to come back to life.
Wow. Is it scary? Some of the promotional material I've seen, sort of zombie eyes.
Right, well, it does take place, after the death of these kids. So there's an element of the unknown, or a kind of limbo, a place of limbo. So that may be a bit frightening to some people, and certainly there's one character that is a headless girl, so she puts a doll head on herself.
Okay, tell us about your character in the story.
Well, as you might have heard some dark lyrics in there.
Yes.
My character is
I did.
the one unidentified body of the roller coaster disaster that starts the show.
Well, that sounds fun.
Yeah, I know.
And this kind of penitent fortune-telling machine who knew they were going to die has given them this opportunity.
And so the whole actual performance is him trying to apologize, or try to, in kind of this purgatory state, to show their hopes and dreams and loves right before he's killed by a giant rat named Virgil.
But now, was that a spoiler? I mean, or
No, he comes out right out the gate and tells you that.
That's the
So
setting, yeah.
Yeah, so no spoilers there.
A musical about a group of 6 kids who die in a roller coaster accident, only to wake up in purgatory with a headless girl who looks like a Victorian doll and can fly, and a cursed fortune teller machine who has the power to bring one of them back to life before being killed by a bass-playing rat, is a far cry from a traditional musical. The story of Ride the Cyclone is anything but simple, both on stage and off. And yet, despite a nearly 20-year history, not much is known about how it actually came to be. Well, that changes now. This is the story of a small-budget cabaret that became bigger than anyone could have imagined, of skeptical producers, mysterious bootlegs, and the power of the internet. This is the story of grief and how we deal with it, of death and how we talk about it, or don't, of life and all the ups and downs and twists and turns that come with it. All to answer the question, what is Ride the Cyclone?
I'm having trouble hearing. What did you say? I'm not afraid of the dark, but of making mistakes. Each click moved the reel forward. The light flickered through it all. Moments in time burned in memory. Hers ended early.
Hornby Island is a slice of land floating off the coast of Vancouver, Canada. The island is so remote that the rocks outnumber the people. Jacob Richmond sat in his vacation rental with hundreds of questions racing through his head. There was no television, no dial-up, no distractions. Just a notebook, a radio, and a bottle of wine. The $15,000 grant from the Canada Council for Arts bought him some time, but it didn't make writing a comedic play about death any easier.
When I got the grant, I had all of these thoughts and kind of was there for the first week and didn't write anything. It was just kind of like kind of crying and going, you know, like every writer who starts any project kind of goes, I don't have any talent. I'm terrible. This is an awful idea.
Richmond needed to write something. And not just because if he didn't, the Canada Council for Arts could ask for the money back. He needed to work through his grief. It'd been 4 years. Why did it still hurt? He needed answers, but the words wouldn't come out. So, he started sketching.
What I usually do with characters that I start is I draw them. Because again, I just want to see what they look like or kind of like the vibe is.
Richmond's initial concept involved a giant flood that wiped out an entire city. It didn't take long for him to realize that the idea was way too grand and expensive for his theater company, Atomic Vaudeville, to ever pull off.
And so then I was like, okay, so not a flood, small cast, fun, kind of, you know, the jazz you do in your brain, and eventually went Cyclone, roller coaster, crash, kind of thing.
Richmond decided to sacrifice a group of small-town teenagers in a roller coaster accident. Uranium City always fascinated Jacob Richmond. An abandoned mining town nestled in Saskatchewan, Canada, its main street, Nuclear Ave, serves as a somber reminder of the once prosperous past. Uranium City's existence relied heavily on the El Dorado mine. Once it shut down, the town's economy collapsed, stores shut down, and the 3,000 residents fled. The current population is 91. Richmond used a fictionalized version of the ghost town in his work before. In his 2006 play Legoland, two siblings named Ezra and Penny Lamb lived in a hippie colony near Uranium City and dreamt of experiencing the world outside of it. Intending for his new piece to be a sequel of sorts, Richmond sketched 8 high schoolers, all members of Uranium City's recently deceased St. Cassian Chamber Choir. Each one a personality found in a small town. There was Ocean, the politician, Noel, the poet, Corey, the worker, Ricky, the musician, Hank and Trishna, the lovers, Constance, the nice girl, and Jane Doe, the decapitated mystery. The classic rock blaring from the radio sent Richmond's night into a blur. He didn't remember falling asleep, or writing the opening scene he found when he woke up. It was a monologue for the nicest girl in homeroom, Constance Blackwood. Over the course of 3 pages, Constance talked about her love-hate relationship of living and dying in a small town, how she lost her virginity to a carny in a porta potty, and how her life was cut short due to the accident. All of this fed into the big question racing through Richmond's mind. What is a life well lived? Surprisingly, a night filled with dead people eulogizing themselves is pretty depressing. In drafts going all the way back to the flood, and even an earlier scrapped volcano premise, Richmond kept running into the same problem. The show was way too sad. For the roller coaster story, he wanted to both lighten the piece and find the joy in it. Enter Brooke Maxwell. A A graduate of Berklee College's music program with a love for Elvis, the Beatles, and jazz, it didn't take long for Brooke Maxwell to discover atomic vaudeville in 2001. Compared to the bustling streets of Boston, the sleepy town of Victoria, British Columbia felt like a graveyard. Many even refer to it as a place for the newlywed and the nearly dead. But none of that applied to atomic vaudeville. The indie theater company was loud, brash, and made art for art's sake. Maxwell was hooked. He started composing songs for the company's cabarets, and formed a close friendship with founders Brett Small and Jacob Richmond. A friendship that eventually led to Richmond and Maxwell discussing a new project.
So I said, yeah, so it's about these, I don't know, just this choir that dies on a roller coaster. And he's like, that sounds really, really dark, right? And I went, oh, no, but I think we can make it fun.
In spring 2008, Maxwell walked into Richmond's vacation rental, ready to turn Ride the Cyclone into a musical. There was just one problem.
We didn't really know what we're doing.
I thought it was going to be easier than writing a play. No.
Despite a degree in music and a family legacy in theater between them, Maxwell and Richmond didn't know much about traditional musicals. Tapping into their cabaret background, the two centered the show around a creepy fortune-telling machine named the Amazing Karnak. The host for the evening, who granted each kid a chance to sing their dream musical number, a eulogy by way of concert, before moving on to the great beyond. From music to jokes, Richmond and Maxwell threw everything at the wall stylistically, and left Hornby Island with a skeleton of a show. Whether anything would stick well enough to match the success of Legoland was another question. I want to show you something. This is the website for the Alcor Life Extension Foundation, a laboratory in Arizona where for just $200,000, you can live forever. Within the first 5 minutes of being declared legally dead, Alcor sends your body to their lab, slips it into a giant metal tube, and cryogenically freezes it. The bodies stay frozen until you can be theoretically revived in the future, when advances in medicine can treat pesky conditions, like aging. For $80,000, they'll scrap your body and only freeze your head. Now, on paper, this sounds ridiculous, but as of this recording, they have 234 patients currently frozen, including the company's founder, and 1,444 people signed up waiting to die. In his 1973 book, The Denial of Death, anthropologist Ernest Becker theorized that since humans understand the inevitability of death, we try to convince ourselves that we're above the rules of nature. Humans have always craved immortality. Some crave it literally, to the point in which they cryogenically freeze themselves, while others crave it symbolically. The first emperor of China sought elixirs to guarantee he could reign over China for eternity. However, when eating mercury didn't work out, he buried himself with an entire army of terracotta soldiers to protect him in the afterlife. Queen Puabi of Mesopotamia buried herself in pounds of gold, and the members of her court likely poisoned themselves to escort her to the underworld. As disease ravaged Victorian England, families turned the hair of the deceased into art to remember them. In modern times, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington Cemetery stands as this symbolic monument to honor soldiers whose remains are lost or unidentified. Whether it's through service, family, wealth, or power, we want our legacy to live on, even if our physical body can't. We need to believe that we're valuable members of our societies. When we die, we want to be remembered as a person, not a statistic.
No one remembered her. Some rumors said she joined at the last minute, others that she never joined at all. When they dug, all they found was her body, not her head, She was a mystery.
Sudden loss haunted Jacob Richmond. The kind of inexplicable event that's impossible to eulogize and creates unanswerable questions. In 1991, Richmond's aunt and grandparents were staying at the home of a close friend when a fire broke out. All three perished. 13 years later, in 2004, Richmond's sister, Rachel Davis, left a club as a fight broke out. Described by friends and family as someone who always tried to help the underdog, Davis tried to help a stranger who was being kicked by a group of attackers. She threw herself into the fray when shots rang out. The bullets killed 2 people, including Rachel Davis. The Globe and Mail quoted her father saying, "The family wanted her last act to be recognized as fearless and compassionate, not written off as another gangland slaying." The article ended with a statistic.
I was totally in an absolute existential nosedive, right? And it just totally kind of devastated our family. And it took me about a year or so, and I certainly didn't want to write any comedy during that time, just dealing with that. And but then I also realized my sister had this beautiful dark sense of humor. So I guess Cyclone was born out of that feeling of, I want to do something with all of this, right? This intense feeling of loss and the universe being so appallingly awful sometimes, but also lovely and beautiful. As for Jane, well, I've always found it kind of moving, the kind of Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, the kind of idea of loss, where they don't even remember who the person is, right? They're just kind of gone.
In September of 2008, a handful of actors and performers gathered for the first reading of Ride the Cyclone in the linoleum-floored basement of St. Nicholas Ukrainian Church.
In our very first time we ever did it from beginning to end, a lot of us immediately were like, oh, this is something special. This is something that I'm willing to work on. Hi, my name is Colby Wardell, and I played Noel Gruber and Monique Chabot in Ride the Cyclone.
The cast and crew spent the next 6 months refining the piece in director Britt Small's apartment before the show's world premiere at Metro Studio in March 2009. Making the most of a small budget, the bare-bones set, designed by Hank Pine and James Insell, better known now as Jimbo the Drag Clown, mismashed together objects from dollar stores and thrift shops to create an abandoned fair warehouse. The designers also appeared in the show. Insell manipulated the amazing Karnak puppet, and Pine played the bass-playing rat Virgil, named after the guide who leads Dante to the gates of paradise in the classic death story, The Divine Comedy.
Oh no, can you see? Those wooden boxes were the original boxes. With the cow stamped on them, because I think Jacob had decided that the fair had it was like an exhibition fair with agriculture, and so there was like a cow motif. So my name is Britt Small, and I was the original director of Ride the Cyclone the musical.
This mixture of highbrow themes and lowbrow humor meant nobody knew what to expect once the run at Metro ended. New musicals in Canada were rare, especially ones that addressed taboo topics with dark humor. Yet for Richmond, that was kind of the whole point. To confront grief and upend our complex relationship with death. A year after the death of Richmond's sister, a close friend named Ned was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, also known as ALS. A degenerative nervous system disease, people diagnosed with ALS lose their ability to walk, talk, and eventually breathe. Unlike most people who view the threat of death as an abstract concept, for Ned, it was suddenly a very real thing.
A lot of disabled people have grown up face to face with death the entire time.
This is Sydney Zarlingo, a disability dramaturg and educator who makes videos on the history of disability in theater.
We have a different relationship with death. Like, I've had many of my friends die very young, and that's just like a thing that happens in our community, and you get used to it, and it sucks, but like, it is what it is.
Richmond experienced newfound grief as the disease took over his friend. As the playwright expanded Cyclone for another production later that year, he explored Ned's story through the lovers, Hank, and a new character named Astrid. The somber dream ballet La La Love told the story of Hank and Astrid's entire relationship, from youth to old age, as his disease worsened. Even though death is literally everywhere, our brains are designed to avoid it. Think about each time we've discussed death in this video. It's uncomfortable, right? Well, psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pazinski believe there's a reason for this. Something called terror management theory. Essentially, our brains try to remove any thoughts of death to avoid spiraling into existential dread. This can happen consciously by going to a movie, shopping, or clicking off a YouTube video that makes you think about it. Please don't do that. But it also happens subconsciously. We convince ourselves death could never happen to us, and that we're significant people in a meaningful universe. Either way, the result is still the same. We don't like talking about death. But that didn't stop Jacob Richmond.
There was a scene after the intermission where we just sat around and we talked about death for like 10 minutes. And I was so convinced that the scene was not going to make it into the play that I didn't memorize it because I was like, there's no way we're going to do this scene. And then like 2 days before, I was like, we're going to do the scene. And it's the only time I've ever gone dry on stage. It was like a solid like 7 seconds of silence, which in theater might as well be 7 minutes. Well, I'm like, I'm just looking at the sky, looking for my line over there in the wings. That's what's waiting in the wings for me is my lines.
After the additions, the runtime for the second version of Ride the Cyclone sat at roughly 2.5 hours. Once again, the show performed well, but the limitations of producing theater in a small Canadian town became apparent. With no clear path forward, Richmond decided it was time to move on. But then, he got a phone call.
A friend of mine, Michael Rubenfeld in Toronto, said, "Hey Jake, I heard you wrote a musical. Do you want to put it on in Toronto?"
She never moved. None of them did. Line by line, they stood with an unbreakable gaze, frozen in time, with no understanding what happened before or what happened next. Trapped.
The Toronto Summerworks Festival was built on risk. As artistic producer of the festival, Michael Rubenfeld wanted to push the boundaries of performance by presenting challenging works that went against the grain. Ride the Cyclone fit that mission perfectly. A hotbed for theater, a positive buzz in Toronto could take the show to the next level. But the great opportunity also came with its fair share of caveats. To pack up the entire set, the cast, and the crew would cost tens of thousands of dollars. What's more, to fit in all the various performances, the max runtime for a show at Summerworks was 90 minutes, meaning the 2.5-hour show was way too long. As if that wasn't enough. Ride the Cyclone was written for a raw, crass, and punk rock cabaret crowd. Wanting a way to perform and experiment with their art, Richmond and Small created Atomic Vaudeville as a beer and pizza theater company that thrived on low-budget creativity, One month, there would be a 100% not gay discotheque hosted by Vladimir Putin. The next, a night with Satan presented by Hallmark. No concept was too radical. Due to the improv nature of Richmond and Maxwell's writing process, Cyclone's exploration of human existence led to both meaningful moments and crude ones. At one point, the character Corey Ross engaged in a mean-spirited rap battle against himself in a funhouse mirror.
He kisses Ocean at one point, and then he tries to kiss Noel. And at one point, he's just like, I think I'm gay. And I was like, I don't like this. This cannot be in the play. I will not do this. And then immediately, Jacob was like, thank you. You're right. We're not going to do this.
The need to streamline the piece for SummerWorks ultimately spawned awkward discussions of cutting characters. The way the writers saw it, Corey's funhouse mirror rap made no sense for a dream number, and Hank and Astrid's dream ballet made it impossible to bring the piece back to a joyful spot. The writers decided to smush the three together into a single character named Misha Baczynski. The character was based on a high school friend of Richmond's who also passed away. Much like Misha in the show, his friend was Ukrainian, loved rap, and had the last name Baczynski. Hank's ALS storyline was abandoned. Meanwhile, on the visual front, the team struggled to wrap their head around how to present a teenager who didn't have one. The only unidentified body from the accident, Jane Doe's current look of bloody scars and ripped up clothes didn't make sense. If she looked like that, why didn't any of the other kids? Richmond's wife and choreographer for the show, Trina Stubel, made a suggestion. Why don't you give her a porcelain doll head? Richmond thought back to his grandmother's collection of Victorian dolls. As a toddler, he remembered hordes of porcelain heads that stared at him with frozen, lifeless eyes. They terrified him. The idea fit perfectly. Armed with their reworked production and $28,000 from a successful fundraiser, the Ride the Cyclone crew descended on the Toronto SummerWorks Festival in August of 2010. The team hoped to build a long-term life for the show outside of Victoria, something entirely dependent on positive reviews from major news outlets. On August 10th, the Globe and Mail published their review. The paper's reach of nearly 3 million readers a week, more than 32 times the entire population of Victoria, held the power to either make or break the production entirely. In their review, they wrote, "Cross Glee with a freak show, and what do you get? Ride the Cyclone. Probably the most uproarious and outrageous piece of musical theater Canada has ever produced." Cyclone's popularity launched into a full-speed thrill ride.
There was just like a huge buzz around it that just happened really quickly. And we won like all the awards at the festival. And there was just like huge excitement and buzz. Everybody was coming to see. You couldn't get a ticket for it.
Talking about Atomic Vaudeville, the winner of 2 major prizes at our country's biggest juried theater festival.
They were like, well, I thought Victoria was all old people, and doesn't it rain there all the time? And I said, no. But yeah, it's funny, just, you know, people have sort of this perception of Victoria as this tiny little place. But we make big theater here, yeah.
The buzz grew so much that producers from Toronto and New York rushed to see it. One of these producers, Maurice Burchard, saw so much potential in Cyclone that he acquired the show's rights and helped produce a tour across regional theaters in Canada. The musical zoomed through sold-out venues. Critics raved about the show's inventiveness, edgy sense of humor, and big heart. The Vancouver Sun went so far as to compare it to another musical, The Drowsy Chaperone, one of the most successful Canada to US exports thanks to producer Kevin McCollum.
While we were doing that tour, that's when producers started poking a stick at it. The Canadian producers, Morris and Antonio, who have invested quite a bit in a lot of Broadway shows, were started bringing up their producer friends, right, to see if they were interested in potentially an American production. And truthfully, none of them cared for the pace that much. So
each tour stop came with a bunch of dinners and reservations. Across the board, the response was the same. The show would never make money in America. The way they saw it, nobody wanted to see a musical comedy about death, especially not one that closed with a heavy monologue and 6 kids hauntingly floating into the unknown. For the first time in his life, Richmond's work was no longer judged by its storytelling, but rather by its commercial viability. It wasn't a show. It was a commodity.
I kind of was in agreement with them. I was like, yeah, there is. It's never going to make any money. But you don't do theater for that.
After 3 months of brutal feedback from producers, the team returned to Toronto empty-handed. Once the haven for opportunity, the city now felt like the final stop before removing Cyclone from the tracks. Ride the Cyclone played its final performance at Theatre Passe Muraille on December 3rd, 2011.
Kelly Hudson, who played Constance, used to joke about how it was really hard to finish doing Ride the Cyclone because you'd have people screaming for you all the time, and then you'd go home and you'd like do your dishes, and you're like, no one's screaming for me when I do my dishes. This sucks. Let's go back and do the show again.
Almost as quickly as it started, the ride ended. But then, the chain started clicking again. Jacob Richmond swore he'd never go back to New York City. But now, he sat in an office directly overlooking Times Square, waiting. How did he get here? The door opened and in walked the man who saw Ride the Cyclone in Toronto and loved it. Producer Kevin McCollum. Having both worked on the 2009 Broadway revival of Ragtime, Kevin McCollum and Maurice Richard were acquaintances who both saw potential in scrappy pieces. McCollum made a career out of taking risks on shows others viewed as uncommercial. Risks that ultimately resulted in Broadway musicals like Rent, Avenue Q, and especially the Canadian musical, The Drowsy Chaperone. In less than 2 years, McCollum transformed the bachelor party skit into a Broadway phenomenon. Now, he wanted to do the same thing with Ride the Cyclone. As the producer said in an interview with the Times Colonist, Ride the Cyclone will get its day in the States if I have anything to do with it. Broadway? That's a couple interviews away.
And they were encouraging us, Kevin specifically was encouraging us to, we love you, you're perfect, now change. We need a plot in here.
Richmond went down an existential rabbit hole for 6 months. To him, the whole point of the show was that there was no point. How would he give a story to a night of musical monologues?
I think it was my father who said, well, why don't you have like the headless one? Like, why don't you have like turn it into kind of a survivor kind of thing, like where one of them gets to come back to life. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. That really works, right? You know, like that can work. Then I created Cats. Yeah.
Unbeknownst to Richmond at the time, the new structure for Cyclone followed closely to the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. Only instead of each cat singing for the chance to die, each teenager would sing for the chance to live. The success of the first tour in Canada left theaters craving more Cyclone. Why not workshop the rewrites with live audiences? However, unlike the early days of the process, Atomic Vaudeville didn't own the show anymore. They sold the rights to Kevin McCollum and Maurice Richard, meaning if they wanted to do a tour, they needed permission.
At first, they didn't think it was a good idea because they were like, oh, we want to save it to do like a New York run. And I was like, no. Like, we want to workshop it. We want it to get better. And it's a really great way to kind of like build a lot of interest in the piece. And so I had to really convince them that it was a good idea to do this tour.
After receiving the go-ahead from McCollum and Burchard, Brett Small started making phone calls to set up the largest gamble in atomic vaudeville history. Presumably to attract investors and theater owners in the States, the production value increased. The set boasted a giant Cyclone sign, and the accompaniment went from one rat on a bass to an entire rat band. To save money, Brooke Maxwell recruited 4 of his high school music students to play in the band. Atomic Vaudeville had never produced a show as expensive as Cyclone, and if the tour didn't sell well, it would send the company and its creators into a financial hole. While the show itself grew, the administrative team did not.
Like, this is my office, and this is our staff, right? So it's like, I was in tears with Equity, the actors union, almost every day for like 3 weeks trying to organize that tour.
Luckily, this time around, she had a powerful ally, Kevin McCollum. With McCollum's help, Small bartered deals with many of the theater owners that if the show sold over a certain amount of money, Atomic Vaudeville would get a percentage of the ticket sales.
And he would come on the phone and say, if you can't sell out this show, there's something wrong with your marketing department. Yeah, it was really helpful having, he was like, I produce Rent. Trust me.
Behind the scenes, the new set brought new troubles. Intricate projections glitched, the music mixing drowned out performers. At one performance, the curtain even got stuck, which made it impossible for actors to walk on and off stage.
That was a really stressful and challenging time because at the same time, it was sort of a workshop tour where Jacob's taking notes going like, no, that's not working. That's the new rewrite. Do we have time to do this? Not really, but we're going to. And everyone was giving 110%.
From January to April of 2013, Ride the Cyclone barreled between cities in the ultimate trial by fire for the creatives. The most consequential stop? Edmonton. Jacob Richmond got a phone call. His wife was in labor 1,500 miles away. The playwright made a mad dash to the airport to get home. The same time that Richmond flew out, Rachel Rockwell flew in. A director from Chicago, Rockwell played a large role in a sort of creative renaissance for the city. And producer Kevin McCollum noticed. So much so that he invited her out to Edmonton to see Ride the Cyclone. After the show, Rockwell grabbed dinner with the cast and creative team. Her kind heart won everyone over, but they didn't understand why she was there. In all honesty, Rockwell didn't even know. All she knew was that Kevin invited her to see the show, and she loved it. A couple weeks later, Richmond and Maxwell flew down to meet with McCollum in New York City. Walking into his office, the producer let the two know he wanted to bring the show to America and introduce them to a potential director for the US transfer, Rachel Rockwell.
All she wanted was a ballad, a story that proved her life meant something. She found only a lament. Each note remained unanswered, each narrative unwritten. The melody of her life drowned out by the tragedy of not knowing.
I remember sitting back in my chair and going, oh my God, this is the strangest thing I've ever read.
As the creative director for Chicago Shakespeare Theater, Rick Boynton loved bold new works. But he didn't know what to make of Ride the Cyclone. Just as he read the last page, his phone lit up with a call from the person who sent him the script, Rachel Rockwell.
And she was like, what do you think? And then I started to talk, and she goes, wait, before you say anything more, can we do a reading? Can we do a workshop? Please, can we just like get it into the ether? And I was like, yes, that's exactly what we should do.
Once Boynton saw the piece on its feet, any reservations vanished.
I was like, there's something amazing here. And I think Chicago Shakespeare Theater is a perfect place to further develop this. So it was like, yes.
The start of the show's United States journey meant the end of the road for director Britt Small and the rest of the Canadian cast.
I think there was an initial hope that we would all go with it if it ever went, and that was something like early on. It's really expensive to bring a Canadian down. Like, it costs money for the visas, and the way the unions work, like it's not my cost. So it gets put onto the theater or the producing entities. So, that's an extra $4,000 of admin and the cost of the visas.
Considering the show had been written and rewritten over 6 years, casting proved difficult. Many of the roles were tailored to fit the performer. Specifically, Jane Doe. In 1973, singer Stevie Wonder sat in the passenger seat of a car heading down Interstate 85, following a flatbed truck carrying lumber. Though it's still unclear what exactly happened, the car slammed into the back of the truck and a giant log crashed through the windshield, striking Wonder in the head and sending him into a coma. Doctors worked day and night to save Wonder, and miraculously, he regained consciousness. The next year, Wonder released the song They Won't Go When I Go, a haunting track that reflected on the horrors of the near-death experience. Early in Ride the Cyclone's process, Brooke Maxwell sat at his grand piano and learned the song for an upcoming church gig. The heavy piano chords felt otherworldly and served as the perfect inspiration for the Ballad of Jane Doe. Maxwell's fingers floated over the keys as he composed a wistful lament for the girl who had only questions.
It was very easy to get in the space. It came out very fully formed and not very long. It wasn't hard writing, which we were to experience much later. And then Jacob was like, yeah, that's beautiful. But what about the jazz? Or, he wanted a little bit more fire in the second half.
Tapping into his love for jazz, Maxwell shifted to the style of New Orleans funeral music. Unlike the traditionally somber funeral processions, New Orleans funerals focused on celebrating the person's life, with big, upbeat brass bands. In the performance, Jane pulled a lever and a bunch of pre-lit umbrellas spun in the darkness. Surrounded by the simulated carnival, she belted to the heavens, fully unleashing her frustrations and begging for anyone to tell her who she was. In that moment, Jane Doe became more than just a character. She became the symbol for the entire tragedy. The character's entire tone revolved around Sarah Jane Pelzer's ability to act in a theatrical way and sing in an operatic style, all while wearing black contacts that covered her entire eye. Recasting the role was a heavy ask. But then, Rachel Rockwell introduced everyone to Emily Rome.
I think she knew that I was a weirdo. I know a lot of people read it and was like, what is this? I have no idea what's happening. But I read it and I was like, this is for me. This is weird. This was made for me.
Now, Rome just needed to prove it to the rest of the team.
At the audition, we had to find Jane Doe's voice, because how do you play a character that has no head, who doesn't know who she is, but she's a teenager? So I went in with the thought of being a radio voice, like a mix between a doll's voice that you pull a cord, but soothing and on the radio. And that's kind of where the neutral, soft, comforting voice came in. And it really kind of went from there.
Once Rockwell joined the production, the show underwent the most intense rewriting process to date. The opening number still threw audiences into a cyclone of confusion. In the span of 7 minutes, audiences met a group of angsty teenagers, watched them all die in a roller coaster accident, encountered a talking fortune-telling machine in purgatory, a bass-playing rat who was going to kill him, and a creepy doll explaining how she lost her head.
That was one of Rachel's first notes, was like, there's a lot happening in that opening. Maybe don't you want to save the headless girl for a little later on while they process the puppet that's talking to them and the 5 dead children talking to them, right? There's a lot to digest there.
Following that, Ocean's absurd gospel number, Play to Win, ended with a cardboard cutout of Karl Marx descending from the heavens. Rockwell knew audiences needed to be eased into the show. To help with this, she felt Ocean's number needed to be the most normal. Richmond and Maxwell wrote and rewrote the song endlessly, even turning the Karl Marx cutout into a puppet. But no matter what they came to Rockwell with, it was still too weird. Frustrated, the writers retreated outside the theater to catch some air. As Richmond chain-smoked in the sweltering heat, the two looked across the river at a horde of tourists on Chicago's Navy Pier.
There was this air show going on, and Taylor Swift's Shake It Off was huge, and it was just playing everywhere, right? But there was also this air show at the Navy Pier, so all these F-14s were going, right? And shake it off, and Brooke and I kind of were looking at each other and going, oh my God, that's it.
The next day, Maxwell came in with the demo for What the World Needs, an aggressive pop song described as air show meets Taylor Swift. The song painted Ocean as a misguided opportunist who tore down the other teenagers to prove why she deserved to come back to life the most. Rockwell loved it. Just as the opening started taking shape, producers started raising concerns over a couple of the other songs, including a wild 12-minute rock song called Space Age Bachelor Man. But most concerning to the writers, producers started coming for the song Noel's Lament. The scene where Noel Gruber reveals his dream life as the promiscuous Monique Gibot stood out as a fan favorite in Canada, a dramatic tango of the suffering he craved. But with a new actor in America, producers thought it sounded like a litany of horrors from a sex worker.
They were coming for it, like out of all the songs. I mean, I think that the producers were always coming for Space Age Bachelor Man. But I was like, okay, if Noel's Lament's not working, then maybe this whole piece isn't working.
One of the first numbers Richmond and Maxwell wrote on Hornby Island, the song set the tone for the entire show. On the surface, the number looked over the top and melodramatic, but underneath, it highlighted the true desire driving the character. If Noel's Lament didn't work, then none of it did. Especially not the Ballad of Jane Doe. In many ways, the two songs are linked and serve as bookends to the show. Once again, each deals with ridiculous premises, but are fueled by honest desires. Jane wants a ballad, but sings a lament about the story she can't find. Noel wants a tragic lament, but sings a ballad about his dream of suffering in post-war France. In Chicago, this wasn't coming through, and producers wanted to cut Noel's Lament altogether, but the director wasn't convinced.
Rachel Rockwell had come and seen it in Edmonton on our tour, so she had seen me do it and was like, I've seen this work. Like, I know it works, and I know it works with Colby.
What I found Noel really, or Colby, I even call him Noel all the time. Colby always got the joy of him telling this awful French penny dreadful novel about kind of a totally slattern life, but you have to have the pleasure in the kind of that. This is kind of his posthumous novel, and this is the kind of stuff he would have written about.
He really, truly gets to live his dream in that moment. I got to live my dream in that moment.
And so they did fly him down, and they went, oh my God, this works.
Colby Wardell walked into a complicated situation. As the only cast member from Canada, The actor appeared in every production of Ride the Cyclone and helped craft the show as much as Richmond and Maxwell. In Chicago, he found the musical in a vastly different spot from where he left it.
It took me a while to work my way in because I came in with so many strong ideas and such an attachment to the original piece that, you know, I went through some conflict, we shall say. And that was my doing. Like, that was fully my doing. I just felt really separate. And being friends with the writers in Chicago, our very first rehearsal, we're singing through Constance's song, and I was like, these are not the harmonies. Like, what's happened here? This isn't the harmonies. And I got up out of my seat and I went to Brooke at the piano and I was like, these are the harmonies. Can I sing you what the harmonies are supposed to be? And, you know, as an actor, no. You don't do that. But I felt at that time a little bit a part of the creative team because I kind of am and was and had been and continued to be. I wasn't on the creative team, but I was in some ways.
The Canadian cast of Ride the Cyclone formed a special type of bond. They performed the same piece across the country for 5 years straight. As the show grew, so did their connection with one another. Now, the new cast in Chicago started from scratch. The group of 6 relative strangers met each other for the first time at the most fitting location.
Twice the fun, Michigan's adventure. Twice the fun, wild water adventure. Twice the fun.
8 miles north of Muskegon, Russell Road exit off US 31.
Wardell had been on this ride before. For each production of Ride the Cyclone, the cast and crew went to various carnivals to film B-roll of the characters riding different rides, footage that eventually wound up in the show as projections. This tradition carried on for Chicago, as the cast spent the day riding rides at Michigan's Adventure amusement park. They even got permission to shut down a roller coaster for the day.
We were going on the coaster over and over again, getting different angles, and one of the associates at the park comes up and is like, "Oh, everything's going great, so what's the show about?" And Jackson, who was playing Ricky at the time, was like, it's just about a teen choir going on a trip. And she's like, "Oh, and no one gets hurt on the coaster, right? Yeah, just for our records or whatever." And then he goes, "Oh, we all die." And we soon got ushered out of that park.
They thought that like people would equate this fictional thing with actual deaths. And we were like, how about we just say less? So what's the story about? It's just about these kids and it's like a competition. Just share about who they are. Don't say the word death. Ever.
The trip to Michigan's Adventure played an important role in bringing the cast together.
We had, I think, a couple nights at a hotel because we were out of state filming it, and we just bonded by going to the pool and riding rides together. And it's some really happy memories.
2 years after the final tour stop in Canada, Ride the Cyclone opened at Chicago Shakespeare Theatre on September 29th, 2015. Once again, nobody knew what to expect. Rick Boyton was up front with the team. Ticket sales weren't great.
Everybody struggled to even know how to market it, first off, to somebody who's never heard of it, right? Like, because, it's about 6 kids who die on a roller coaster, right? But it's a comedy. It's a comedy. But how is that funny? Like, how do you I remember us trying to sell it to somebody at a jazz bar, and they said, that just sounds bleak, man.
Unlike other companies, Chicago's Shakespeare Theatre operated as a subscription house. This meant members purchased their tickets for the whole season in advance. Surprisingly, a show marketed as Glee meets Survivor wasn't driving ticket sales. The doors to the theater opened, and the older audience wandered in.
And they were really quiet all the way through it. And Rachel turned to me and she said, "Oh, fucking dead," right? Because they skew towards a younger demographic.
Oh, it was so terrifying. Yeah. For a lot of the newer people involved with the show, they hadn't performed it in front of an audience yet. So I think there was a feeling that I'm not sure if this show really works. I love it. I'm enjoying it. Like, we're all enjoying doing it together. But there was a fear. There was a palpable fear before that show began.
Number after number came and went without the enthusiastic laughs or screams they'd grown used to in Canada.
I had flop sweat that whole first half of the show. You know what I mean by flop sweat? Yeah.
But explain it for people who don't know.
When you're in something and you're not sure that you're going to do well, sometimes flop sweat's also when you're in something and you know you're not good in it. And you're like, oh no, I was miscast in this and I have to do it. And I'm gonna go on stage and I'm just gonna be drenched in sweat the whole time because my body is saying, leave, don't do this.
The cast reassembled into their roller coaster formation as the curtain dropped around them. The silence lasted an eternity.
Well, like I was like, oh my God, this is a bomb.
The cast stepped forward for a painful curtain call. When, out of nowhere, the audience leapt to their feet and gave the show one of the loudest standing ovations they'd ever received. Shockingly, the musical's momentum grew through word of mouth. In an unexpected review, New York Times critic Charles Isherwood raved that Ride the Cyclone was an unceasingly delightful new musical that achieved a rare unity in its book, music, and lyrics. Around the same time, a man named Will Cantler visited Chicago and asked friends what the hot shows in town were. The name that continuously popped up? Ride the Cyclone. As the artistic director of MCC Theater in New York, Cantler preferred plays to musicals. But after seeing Ride the Cyclone, he was spellbound. Once he returned to New York City, Cantler reached out to the creative team with an offer none of them thought possible. He wanted to stage the show off Broadway. The lights danced in Jacob Richmond's apartment, welcoming him back to the city. He sat in an apartment nestled above the M&M store. Below, the theme from New York, New York blared from pedicabs circling Times Square as Frank Sinatra declared, "If I can make it there, I'm gonna make it anywhere." Once the big fish in the small pond of Canadian theater, New York City placed them in the heat of a competitive landscape. This wasn't the town of 92,000 people in which they started. This was a city of 8.3 million. The show's $1.2 million capitalization made the first budget of $15,000 look like pocket change. With that much money on the line, things started to change. Gone were the days when Richmond and Maxwell ran around writing the show, operating spotlights, mixing sound, and running the projections. Now, there was a department for everything. The new production also brought a new casting team with it. This meant the actors from Chicago needed to re-audition for their roles. Even though she perfected the toned-back performance of Jane Doe in Chicago, Emily Rome's audition in New York left the casting team unimpressed.
I kind of did what I was doing in the Chicago production for the audition, and I don't think they quite understood because I didn't have the makeup and stuff on, and it was so blank-faced that I think they thought I just wasn't acting.
In a city of roughly 19,000 union actors, the casting team prepared to continue their search. They gave her one more chance to do it again, but this time with more emotion.
So that was where I discovered, oh yes, I really do have to find this balance. I had to put it in my body with like just the looks of the head and looking up to the sky with the body. And I really had to infuse a lot of the emotion into my voice while staying blank-faced.
4 of the 7 roles from Chicago were recast by actors with impressive resumes. Alex Weiss from Deaf West Spring Awakening took over the role of Ricky Potts. Gus Hauper won the role of Misha Baczynski, and Peter Pan live star Taylor Louderman took over the role of Ocean. In the end, the returning cast from Chicago included Colby Wardell as Noel, Lillian Castillo as Constance, and Carl Hamilton as the Karnak puppet, now with human hands. For the role of Jane Doe, the casting team ultimately decided to move forward with Emily Rome.
She didn't want to die. With a single breath, the sky turned into a dizzying haze, her body as light as her voice. Just when she thought she'd hit the ground, a force flung her back into the air. She floated through a flurry of lights. The fear vanished. She was weightless.
A gantry crane is a combination of steel and bolts that weighs as much as a large grizzly bear. Often found in shipyards, rail yards, scrap yards, and any other industrial yards you can think of, gantry cranes typically lift industrial materials, like train tracks and full-sized boats. A couple weeks into the process for Ride the Cyclone's off-Broadway transfer, Emily Rome met with costume designer Teresa Ham. That's where she learned that in New York City, a gantry crane was going to lift a person.
And so I was at a fitting, and Teresa said, okay, well, then now we change you into your jumper where the harness can be built in. And I was like, excuse me? Why do I need a harness?
From Victoria to Chicago, the jazzy second half of Jane Doe was modest in its presentation. After the beautiful Stevie Wonder-esque piano section, Jane pulled a lever which lit up various carnival rides made out of umbrellas.
I would walk straight into the audience and then look at people, and some people would gasp, or because I had the black contacts in, the pasty face of in the doll wig. It was very creepy, and I got to just really see the looks on the audience's faces.
This simple approach worked fine elsewhere, but for New York City, producers wanted to take the number to new heights. This led to the awkward conversation between Emily Rome and costume designer Teresa Ham.
And I was like, why do I need a harness? And she's like, oh, for the gantry crane, for the flight. And I was like, no one talked to me about this. And she was like, oh, maybe we should have the producers discuss this.
In an attempt to create a show-stopping moment, engineers modified a gantry crane into an industrial teeter-totter. The plan was simple. Place Emily Rome in a special harness and connect her to the crane via a metal tube. Once locked in position, she would just need to crouch and jump once the jazzier second half started to fly. The absence of cables meant 2 people operating the crane off stage could send Rome spinning, twirling, and twisting across the entire stage. The danger overshadowed the excitement. Technical malfunctions happened in theater all the time. Heck, 4 years earlier, a stuntman in Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark plunged 30 feet off stage when his safety harness wasn't properly attached. Miraculously, he survived, but still broke his skull, ribs, and cracked 3 vertebrae in the process. While the maximum height for Rome's flight was way less, it still posed the risk of significant injury or death if something went wrong. Standing on the Lucille Lortel stage, Emily Rome took a deep breath and waited. Behind her, actor Gus Halper and a stagehand prepared to catch her. Rome crouched down, unlocking the crane. With a single jump, she propelled upwards, and then everything stopped. The ground wasn't at her feet anymore. It was directly below her head as she sat suspended above the stage 15 feet, upside down.
I think that was the first time I ever had to sing upside down, now that I think about it. I guess it doesn't come up all that often, but I kept being scared that I was gonna just get dumped right out. So they put a mat under me and put me upside down and just said, try and get out. and I couldn't.
Free of the fear, Rome relaxed and floated effortlessly across the stage.
I think that first tech of flying, I think I was in that harness for a full 8 hours.
While the mechanics of the flight worked perfectly, the physics involved posed a new problem. Specifically, how would Jane Doe fly upside down without her skirt falling over her head? To make the skirt defy gravity, costume designer Teresa Ham designed a skeleton skirt, where each pleat held a steel bone.
And when I brought her that, with all the bones in every single pleat, it was A, really heavy, and B, she couldn't walk. And so we ended up having this experiment of like, how many bones do I take away before it falls over your head? And I think we ended up with like every third pleat has a steel bone in it. So that way it moves like a skirt, but also it's magic and it doesn't fall over her head when she goes upside down.
Before the cast and crew knew it, the show's first performance arrived. The day was historic. Only not because of the musical.
And here we go. This is a Fox News election alert. We just got new metrics in. Donald J. Trump is the president of the United States elect.
The president-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
It's a really strange day. Yes. Half the country is really happy. Half the country somewhere between despondent and furious.
Walking around the streets of New York today, a lot of people a little rough. You know, you can see it in their eyes.
Ride the Cyclone started previews on November 9th, 2016. One day after the presidential election.
So everybody was in the mood for a black comedy. So and I remember the city, it was just like so intense. Just the feeling of dread in that city was palpable.
Even before the election, many sensed the New York audiences would be much harder to impress. Ride the Cyclone knocked it out of the park everywhere it went. But New York City was a completely different animal.
So it was confusing for me because, you know, growing up in a small town on the west coast of Canada, I'm like, yeah, New York, Greenwich Village is like the hippest place in the world. And then when we went there, you'd see all these cool and interesting people outside. But then when we actually went in the theater, it's like, but where are the cool people? Like, these are not our people.
Another subscriber theater, the show encountered the same issue as Chicago. The audience skewed older, and nobody, from the cast to the crew to the audience themselves, knew what they were getting into. The team spent sleepless nights rewriting and reworking and recomposing. 5 days after the first preview performance, Richmond's process came to an abrupt halt. His mother, actress Janet Wright, passed away. After a brief trip home to Victoria, Richmond returned to New York with his wife and son. Sitting in his Times Square apartment, the once invigorating bright lights became unbearable. The constant noise, inescapable. And the eyes of the M&Ms brooded over it all, like the eyes of God. Emotionally lost, Richmond tried to refocus his energy on his therapy. Ride the Cyclone. Unfortunately, Back at the theater, backstage tension and cast frustration reached a boiling point. Sparks on the roller coaster flew when, a week before opening, Ocean actor Taylor Louderman announced on Twitter she was exiting the production due to creative differences. Running out of time, producers frantically recruited the actress who played Ocean in Chicago, Tiffany Tatro, to reprise her role off-Broadway. On November 30th, 2016, Ride the Cyclone barrel rolled into opening night at the Lucille Lortel Theater. Once again, Charles Isherwood of the New York Times wrote a positive review, but overall, something felt different. After racking up rave reviews and raucous crowds everywhere it went, Ride the Cyclone in New York received the only thing worse than negative reviews: indifference.
Sometimes we just got those reviews, which I always call the worst reviews, which are the kind of, it was all right, right? You know, like a lot of those, which I actually think hurt more than somebody saying it was the biggest steaming piece of shit in the world. I'd rather get that review than they tried.
There was this sense of dissatisfaction with the way the show was going, and the audience really wasn't connecting.
Brooke and I discovered the site Show Score, which is kind of like this ticker tape of your successes and failures. It's like Broadway Twitter, right? Like you're going, oh, they liked it. Oh, no, it's the worst thing that, you know what I mean? Like, so, I'm trying to get through this without using the roller coaster metaphor, but it was like a lot of up and down, up and down, up and down.
In the same vein as MCC Theater's dark, brooding plays, the marketing for Ride the Cyclone portrayed the show as a heartbreaking night of theater.
Ride the Cyclone is fun. Ride the Cyclone is, creepy sometimes. Ride the Cyclone is joyous, tragically uplifting.
This surely left many audience members confused when they heard an extremely offensive pop song, a musical number about sleeping with cats, and a giant rat playing the bass.
It's a very much a comedic show that does take you by surprise with its art. But if you tell everyone what the surprise is, then everybody's watching the show going, where's the heart that this show is supposed to have? The whole show.
Once again, Ride the Cyclone was a commodity. Instead of celebrating the piece for what it was, critics, audiences, and other producers viewed it through the lens of whether it could succeed on a more commercial Broadway stage. The show extended its run by 10 days. Rachel Rockwell recorded the performance for her own future reference, and the musical closed on December 28th, 2016. Producer Kevin McCollum tried to gather a group of investors for a Broadway transfer, but after MCC, many recognized the inconvenient truth. Ride the Cyclone still needed work before making the jump to Broadway. Jacob Richmond packed his bags and flew home. Near the end of Ride the Cyclone, Karnak gives the sole vote to decide who comes back to life to Ocean. For a split second, it looks like she's gonna choose herself. After all, that's what her entire song was about. The world needed people like her. But instead, she chooses Jane Doe. As Ocean says, to say that if one dies young, they die needlessly, that is to discount the years we had. Jane walks into the light, and finally, Karnak reveals her name. Penny Lamb. Though the question of her name is answered, they leave the question of who she is unanswered. Is she the same Penny Lamb from Legoland? Is she a multiverse variant? Does she pick up her life where she left off? Or does she start a new one altogether? Jacob Richmond has his own beliefs, and I could share them with you, but that defeats the purpose of the musical. Life doesn't always come with answers. Rachel Rockwell was a fighter. While Ride the Cyclone prepared for its next stage of development, another musical she was directing, based on the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books, inched closer to a Broadway transfer. To be on the brink of a major career breakthrough in a profession she always thought of as a boys' club was exhilarating. Regardless of the response in New York City, producers still saw potential in both Ride the Cyclone and Rachel Rockwell. They invited her back to direct 2 new stagings. One in Seattle in 2018, and the other in Atlanta in 2019. A large majority of the cast from Chicago reunited in the Rainy City. Of all the changes, the most major came during the show's ending. A fan of the band Supertramp, Rockwell proposed a song called Be Safe, Be Good to play over Jane Doe's projections as she comes back to life. Rockwell gave it her all to steer the show in a new direction. But stopping chemotherapy made it difficult. She'd been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Although she tried to enter Seattle rehearsals with the same warm energy everyone knew and loved, her health declined.
She was really sick in Seattle because unfortunately she'd done chemo 2 times before, and she said she just couldn't do it again. And so she said the cure is worse than the disease to a certain extent, so she was going to try to do more of a holistic thing.
That was a really rough production. That was a really tough time. My mom was also really sick when I was young, so seeing Rachel that sick was triggering for many, many reasons. And you know, she tried so hard to be there for us. I remember us doing tech, and she was so sick that she was laying on the floor with the God mic and trying to watch from the floor in the back of the theater and being like, that lighting shift was wrong. We need to fix the timing on the curtain there. And just constantly cheerleading for everybody and being there for us. And it was just like, oh man, this woman is like, I felt it was very clear to me what was happening.
And so we're in the green room, and she just said, oh, I'm so sorry. And I went, fuck off. I mean, you know, don't say sorry. You know, this is just a story, right? You know, and then kind of, yeah. We hugged, and that was the last time I saw her. But then she went to the hospital. Fortunately, they got her home to Chicago, and she passed there. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was really tough. She was like a mom, you know, like she fought so hard for me to come to the States and to be part of the show. And she, you know, Lillian was her son's babysitter for many years. Emily had been her ingenue.
She was so democratic and really wanted to make sure that everyone was right for the parts. But I did, I think, 17 shows with her before she passed, and I will miss her dearly.
Well, the funny thing is because the initial impetus of the piece was to kind of explore my grief, the death of my sister, and then I also lost Rachel, and both of their names are Rachel, which is Hebrew for lamb. So Penny Lamb is the one who comes back, right? You know, and so like I kind of used the lamb as an avatar for Rachel. So yeah, it's kind of the commemoration on those parts.
The musical closed in Seattle on May 20th, 2018. Rachel Rockwell passed away 8 days later.
Each click moved the reel forward. The light flickered through it all. Moments in time burned in memory. Hers ended early.
The coaster's been running for ages. We don't know how it started or why we're on it, but we strap in and ride. With each loop, things change, but the ride keeps running. We know we'll have to get off at some point. Everyone does. We don't know when, but it will happen. So why are we on it? And what happens when someone gets off? Ricky Potts was always meant to fade into the background. Dubbed the most imaginative kid in town, Ricky's role in the original Atomic Vaudeville production centered around his piano. He rarely spoke to the other teenagers and opted to let the keys do the talking instead. For Richmond, this was all by design. He hoped that the audience would forget Ricky was a member of the cast, thus making his fantasy rock song about loving cat women in space all the more surprising. To Richmond, Ricky's song Space Age Bachelor Man played a crucial role in making the show feel like a roller coaster. A quick whiplash into something completely unexpected. But to the producers, they just saw a random song that went on way too long and a man on a piano who made the show feel more like a cabaret and less like a musical. Producers wanted the character cut. In a bid to save Space Age Bachelor Man, Richmond and producers reached a compromise to take the character off the piano and place him side by side with the rest of the choir. While this made Ricky more active physically, removing the piano also kinda removed his purpose. Each character in Ride the Cyclone explored some aspect of mortality. Jane explored dying without anyone remembering. Noel explored living without feeling. What Ricky Potts explored remained unclear. After the final tour stop in April of 2013, Richmond thought back on his friend Ned. Miraculously, 8 years after his diagnosis, Ned was still alive. Referencing back to early drafts, Richmond decided to try exploring mortality through disability once again. Looking at the cut character of Hank, the playwright retrofitted aspects of his ALS into Ricky. This included portraying him as non-speaking and using mobility aids for the opening number. Feeling that the term Lou Gehrig's disease added a jarring dose of reality to the fantasy world of the show, the presentation of Ricky's disease was more nondescript and didn't cite a specific disability. Adding to the fantasy, once Ricky entered the afterlife, he realized that he didn't need the mobility aids anymore and stopped using them for the rest of the show. What's more, Ricky willingly conceded from the competition to come back to life, the only person to do so. By the time the New York production rolled around, some team members started questioning this decision. They sensed the mobility aids made it seem like they were exploring the idea of somebody living with a disability in the world, as opposed to the original intention of somebody dealing with their mortality.
He's not really super developed in comparison to every other character in that show, to a somewhat bizarre degree. Like, disability aside, he needs more depth as a character, and I think that's just because we perceive disability as being a character trait still, when it's not. I mean, like, it is. Like, I'm a disabled person, that's a part of who I am, but it shouldn't be like one of the things that's like, oh yes, this person is fun and they're interested in this, they're interested in this. This one's disabled and they're sad. Like, there needs to be more than that as a person. Hi, I'm Sydney. I'm a disability dramaturg, and I make video essays about disability in the theater canon and what disability representation can look like.
Despite these reservations, Ricky's disability remained as is in the New York, Seattle, and Atlanta productions. After Seattle, the team's relationship to Ride the Cyclone changed. The question of what is a life well lived carried a different weight. Despite Rockwell's passing, the show was still booked to perform at the Alliance Theater in Atlanta in 2019. Everyone wanted a sense of finality and viewed Atlanta as the ending of one story and the start of the next. After the show's final curtain, Brooke Maxwell and Jacob Richmond finally agreed it was time to let Ride the Cyclone go. In their words, it was time to see if someone else could bake the cake without them. Colby Wardell, who'd been there since the beginning, and the rest of the actors decided it was time to move on too. Since Cyclone's performance in New York City, Kevin McCollum's phone rang non-stop. A director named Sarah Rasmussen wanted to stage it. The artistic director for Jungle Theater in Minnesota, Rasmussen shifted the theater away from classic shows like The Glass Menagerie, Hamlet, and Waiting for Godot. Instead, she focused on producing new original works, made by women and people of color. As Minneapolis St. Paul magazine put it, this approach led to an uptick in theater memberships and brought in younger members. Acknowledging the team's wishes to pass the torch, Kevin McCollum granted Rasmussen the show's first ever licensing agreement. Rasmussen and a new creative team staged the show without Richmond or Maxwell involved in the process. Though the script remained untouched, the approach looked much different. The once flat set gained new dimensions, with platforms and an elevated turntable. The amazing Karnak, once performed by a puppet, was now played by the show's choreographer. The show opened to stellar sales and reviews in September of 2019, including 2 thumbs up from Maxwell and Richmond. Ride the Cyclone might not have found a life on Broadway, but Jungle Theater proved it could have one through community, school, and regional productions. To expand the show's reach and provide the Atlanta cast one last hurrah, everyone reunited one last time to preserve the show with a cast album. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, each actor recorded their parts in studios across the country. Jacob Richmond, who voiced Karnak early in the show's run, returned to voice the fortune-telling puppet. In a nod to Rachel Rockwell, her son played the guitar for Space Age Bachelor Man. Though Be Safe, Be Good ultimately got cut after Seattle, Brooke Maxwell still sang the song as a bonus track for the album, renaming it Be Safe, Be Good for Rachel. The album released on May 7th, 2021. As vaccination numbers grew and restrictions eased, the McCarter Theater Center in New Jersey searched for a marquee show to close out its 2021 to 2022 season. And the company's new artistic director, Sarah Rasmussen, knew just the show.
Hi there, my name is Yannick Robin-Ike. My pronouns are they, he, and I was Ricky Potts in the McCarter Theater version of Ride the Cyclone. I had never heard of the show. I had never seen a version of the show. I didn't know it was going up, but someone who worked at the McCarter Theater at the time knew of me and thought of me for the role, and they invited me to go audition for it. They did a callback over Zoom, and I played the guitar, and I sung while I danced with my cane for the solo. It was very awkward and very weird, but it seemed to work in my favor. And so I was cast after that. I was given the script at that point, and that was the first time that I had the full context of what the show was about.
Reading through the script, Mirko started noticing a series of lines they felt were problematic, mainly involving Ocean. The character's edges were always the roughest, even going back to the very first Atomic Vaudeville production. By design, Ocean thought she was a good person, but her ruthless ambition and misguided views proved she was anything but. Her original song, Play to Win, centered around an imaginary debate competition. In an attempt to win the approval of her mother, Ocean branded her opponents as pedophiles and Hitler sympathizers. When she reached her final opponent, a blind competitor in a wheelchair, Karl Marx descended from the heavens and told her she could do all these horrible things, but her soul was the one keeping score. While her new song, What the World Needs, pulled back, the derogatory nature was still ingrained in the character's DNA. She painted Misha as someone who stole hubcaps, she called Jane Doe a freaky monster, and she asked how long's he got if we feed him through a tube, in reference to Ricky. These comments, mixed with Ricky abandoning his mobility aids and being the only character to concede, all rubbed Mirko the wrong way. Curious to learn more, he started researching past productions. And that's when they realized they were the first disabled actor to play Ricky Potts.
And then I started reading about it, and I was like, oh, I haven't said yes yet. Let me talk to the person that I know at the theater who invited me in to ask what this experience is going to be like. Because if they're not down to hear suggestions, I'm not down to do it. We started the process from there.
Mirko wanted the space to discuss any concerns, specifically over lines that appeared ableist or staging non-compliant with the Americans with Disability Act, or ADA, a law that, quote, protects people with disabilities from discrimination. In correspondence involving the McCarter team and Yannick Robin Mirko, the early months between the two parties appeared positive and cordial. On March 11th, Sarah Rasmussen and other members of the team met with Yannick Robin Mirko via Zoom to learn more about how they could make the process a positive one. An email recap of the call mentioned that it was Mirko's first production with his disability, and that for stigma reasons, he requested that his wheelchair be referred to as Jasper. Initially unaware that Mirko used a wheelchair, and with only 4 weeks until the set needed to be finished, the team quickly sketched adjustments to the design. A few days later, Mirko sent Jasper's measurements, and on March 18th, he visited McCarter's scene shop to test multiple ramp variations. McCarter planned to use ramps with either a 1:6 or a 1:8 ratio slope, meaning a 1-inch rise for every 6 or 8 inches in length. Emails between the team found that a 1:6 slope was too steep, but that a 1:8 slope was doable. For existing buildings and a 6-inch rise, the ADA requires a slope between 110 and 112. Though the email correspondence suggests Mirko approved the ramps, Mirko claims he never did. On March 29th, rehearsals for Ride the Cyclone at McCarter Theater began, and so did the process of changing the language to be more disability conscious.
Some suggestions were me, others were from other castmates. When anyone brought up a suggestion on a line that felt kind of weird or ableist, then there was about a conversation where it was open to the room and tried to figure out how we could dramaturgically find an alternate to it.
Anytime a cast member felt concerned or uncomfortable with the material or the process, they'd all come together in a circle of chairs for a discussion. The process of rehearsals and discussions continued for weeks. Since the writers were still in Canada, any changes to the script were communicated through director Sarah Rasmussen. According to emails obtained by Wait in the Wings, on April 9th, 2022, the theater sent a message to playwright Jacob Richmond that highlighted, quote, 2 small tweaks Yannick Robin Mirko wanted to make to the text to help Ricky feel more empowered. The section involved the introduction of Ricky Potts by Karnak. In it, Karnak explained how Ricky was born with a rare degenerative disease, and that after he lost his power of speech, his parents took a vow of silence and only communicated with him using random hand gestures. In the email, Rasmussen shared suggested revisions that spawned from conversations between herself and Yannick Robin Mirko. This included a suggestion to add the line, while Ricky expanded his universe of communication by learning American Sign Language, his family sadly lagged behind. Rasmussen also shared the suggestion that instead of Ricky having no way to communicate, they could instead have Ricky sign something to his parents in legitimate American Sign Language, only for his parents to do a random gesture in response. In reference to the line born with a rare degenerative disease, Rasmussen conveyed the suggestion of adding a script note that read, if the actor does not have a physical disability, please consider using a rare condition. Upon receiving the suggestions, Richmond shared that he was considering cutting any reference to Ricky dying of a neurological disorder. In Richmond's eyes, he felt he, quote, never found a way to express the subject in an elegant manner. On April 11th, 2022, Jacob Richmond once again started brainstorming about Ricky Potts. One day later, he emailed Rasmussen with an update to the character. Instead of the American Sign Language idea, Richmond proposed going back to Ricky's musical roots. A journey through instruments in which he would start the show playing a tambourine and end it by shredding on an electric guitar. This idea came from a rehearsal of an earlier version of Cyclone in which a number used tambourines. According to Richmond, Brooke Maxwell collected all the tambourines on a coffee break and hid them so the actors could never find them again. According to the emails, Richmond changed Ocean's line from "How long's he got if we feed him through a tube?" to "Never really heard from, only ever seen, are we going to bring back the dude who plays the tambourine?" As Mirko described it, he felt any changes took weeks to approve and implement. As the weeks of rehearsal progressed, Mirko increasingly felt that, quote, "the novelty of accessibility started to wear off on people," and that eventually the, quote, "professionality of continuing to provide accessibility was no longer relevant." During a dance rehearsal on April 12th, the show's choreographer, who also played Karnak in the previous Jungle Theater production, allegedly failed to refer to Mirko by name, repeatedly referring to them only by the position of Jasper, or the chair, as witnesses claim. The choreographer also reportedly grabbed Jasper by the handles and physically pushed Mirko to a different position on stage without the actor's consent. Soon, the group meetings in the circle of chairs intended as open dialogue seemingly turned into the creative team defending themselves and their decisions. The choreographer eventually left the production. According to an email sent to the cast from Gina Pisasale, in an effort to learn best practices for engaging with and addressing disability, McCarter invited Dr. Roger Idaishi to speak to the cast and crew on April 21st. As stated on his Kennedy Center website biography, Idaishi dedicated his life's work to developing holistic approaches for creating programs within artistic space that are accessible for children with sensory and cognitive disabilities. For Mirko, the tension peaked following a backstage incident as the show neared its final performance.
So there's a symptom of my disease. Overnight, basically every night, I throw up for a couple hours a night, and it's blood. And very rarely does it happen in the daytime. I have tried to figure out a thread to why it happens in the daytime, and the only thing I can find is overexertion, physical overexertion.
Mirko claims he voluntarily disclosed these symptoms before accepting the role. And according to the actor, he only needed to excuse himself from rehearsal once due to the symptoms appearing. The administrative team allegedly met with Mirko to talk through a plan of what would happen should they be in physical or mental distress. The understudy plan stated that if Mirko was in unquestionable physical, emotional, or mental distress, stage management would make the call for Mirko's understudy to go on in their place. According to a stage management report, the understudy covered for Mirko when they missed 2 performances on May 20th and 21st due to feeling ill. However, Mirko states this wasn't due to a physical illness, but rather from tension amongst himself and a few fellow actors. According to Mirko, the energy got so bad for him backstage that he needed time to convince himself to finish out the weekend. But 4 days later, everything changed.
There was something off with me. I wasn't able to keep time. It felt even worse than all the other days. I think because of the fact that I had contained it all the times prior. It was in the 11th hour of the show. I waited as long as I could. And eventually I had to find what seemed like the best way to slide out that wouldn't go noticed, to go to the bathroom to throw up. And I dip. I noticed some people start to follow me, but right now I'm more concerned with not throwing up blood all over this costume. And they're in between before the last song of the show. And I'm like, I can try. I can do this. I can try. And I'm trying to get it out of me as much as I can so that I can get back up and finish the show. And I hear knocking on the door, banging on the door, banging on the door. And eventually I get out. It's done. The show's done. And I apologize. I come out, and there's like a shoehorn of people around the door, being like, what the F happened? Where'd you go? What the heck? And then I explained myself, and then they said okay, and then I left. And then the next day, I got a vague text from the DEI lady with a Zoom link, and it was her and the stage manager, and the rest is history.
Upon returning to his hotel room, Yannick Robin Mirko learned via Zoom that a conversation had been held between the company's artistic and stage management teams. They decided that Mirko's non-disabled understudy would perform the remaining dates of the run. Ride the Cyclone at the McCarter Theater closed as scheduled 3 days later. The situation involving McCarter Theater and Yannick Robin Mirko largely went unnoticed. Up to this point, Ride the Cyclone was still a relatively underground show. However, mysteriously, in late 2022, a seemingly professional recording of the off-Broadway production found its way online. Suddenly, people could watch the show all the way through from the comfort of their own home for free and in shockingly clear quality. Before long, a clip of Jane Doe flying through the air made its way to TikTok. 6 years after their final off-Broadway bow, Ride the Cyclone found its audience: Gen Z. They came of age through the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, where millions of people died and the news showed freezer vans overflowing with bodies. Unlike past generations that could escape death thoughts by turning off the TV or folding up the newspaper, Gen Z was exposed to it, uncensored, through a constant stream of social media. To them, death humor wasn't taboo. It was a way to cope. Within no time, Ride the Cyclone dominated TikTok. Some people sang covers, some dove into fan theories, others explored the complexities of the Ride the Cyclone iceberg. In the same DIY approach of Cyclone's early days, people even started cosplaying as Jane Doe. The boom in popularity couldn't have come at a better time for Sarah Rasmussen, who was planning to transfer the McCarter production to Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. In December of 2022, the cast of the Arena Stage transfer was announced, and it soon became clear that internet fame was a double-edged sword. The questions surrounding Ricky Potts grew after McCarter. While some disabled fans found the lines about being fed through a tube relatable and appreciated how it demonstrated how wrong Ocean's views were, others found the lines to be offensive and ableist. In August of 2022, Jacob Richmond started to implement additional changes to the origin of Ricky Potts. Around the same time, Yannick Robin Mirko reached out to the executive producer of Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. Knowing Arena planned to reuse the same set for McCarter, Mirko claims he was nervous for another actor to be placed in an environment which he viewed as unsafe, with steep wooden ramps and an elevated turntable. Mirko also used the email to Arena to cite concerns over ableist language they encountered in the script during their time at McCarter. The executive producer of Arena Stage allegedly promised that the set met all the health and safety standards established by the National Union, Actors Equity, and that none of the lines Mirko cited as problematic were in the production anymore. The producer went on to say that he conferred with the Director of Equity and Organizational Culture at McCarter, Gina Pisasale, and Sarah Rasmussen about Mirko's time at McCarter. He reportedly told Mirko, "The constant invitations for collaboration and resources provided by Sarah, Gina, and their creative and administrative teams were extraordinary. Those sensitivities described to me new lessons that model policies and behaviors we can all learn from." What's more, a YouTube video released by McCarter received praise for their casting of a disabled actor to play Ricky. The way Mirko saw it, nobody knew their side of the story. He felt that he needed to go public. In October 2022, Mirko left a series of comments on the YouTube video that directly responded to the praise. In one of the comments, Mirko alleged that the person who removed them from the show said, "Let me know if I need to buy you lunch tomorrow so you don't take this to Twitter or anything." In another, they claimed that the choreographer left the show after the cast outwardly expressed their discomfort with witnessing Mirko being called the chair. The responses to the comments poured in, and the sentiments toward McCarter shifted. If you scroll through the video 2 years later, even though the replies to Mirko still exist, none of his original comments do. On November 12th, 2022, Mirko released a 6-minute clip on YouTube, detailing the events of their final performance. In the video, Mirko also claimed that McCarter, quote, fired them because their disabilities were too physically inconsistent for the physical requirements of theater. 3 days later, Mirko received an email from Gina Pisacel. According to a copy of the email posted on the Ride the Cyclone wiki, Pisacel stated that the McCarter team was caught off guard by Mirko's criticisms, and explained how they rounded up emails and text messages that supported a positive collaboration between the two parties. She went on to say that McCarter knew Mirko was in contact with the, quote, folks at Arena. As she put it in the email, while we fully understand and appreciate your advocacy for performers who use mobility aids, we are surprised and disappointed by much of what you expressed, considering your collaboration and consent through much of the process. The email went on to say, most notably, we are shocked by your representation that you were fired. As you know, that's not true. As of August 2023, Pisacel no longer works at McCarter Theater. The online backlash continued to grow once Arena Stage announced the cast for Ride the Cyclone in December 2022. The person playing Ricky was Mirko's understudy at McCarter. The post was filled with replies, stating, looks like it's time to get the fake crutches out of storage, and this is disgusting. Hashtag save Ricky Potts. The statement from Arena's executive producer that none of the lines Mirko cited as problematic were in the production anymore was true. In the revised script, first performed at Blue Bridge in 2022, Ricky no longer lost his speech from a degenerative disease, but rather from the trauma of witnessing his father die of a snake bite. Visually, the role more or less returned to the same presentation as the 2013 tour, in which Ricky never used mobility aids. As Richmond put it in a blog post for Arena Stage, quote, this does not bar a performer with disability playing any of the 7 roles. In fact, it's encouraged.
That feels like a bit of a cop-out to me. And there's also the idea that like, oh, if we cut the physical disability, we've now made it so that anybody can play the role, which is supposed to make it more inclusive, but that's not actually more inclusive because what you're doing is you're cutting representation that we don't get.
Amidst the comments from Yannick Robin Mirko, the changes to Ricky's disability received backlash online. Once again, Ride the Cyclone went viral. Only this time, for a much different reason. Within days, hashtag #SaveRickyPotts dominated TikTok and Twitter. Videos popped up that condemned McCarter Theater and even encouraged people to boycott the Arena production. A petition to not erase Ricky's physical disability raised over 8,000 signatures. Twitter posts from Ride the Cyclone fans expressed disappointment, applauded Mirko, and blasted Arena for erasing Ricky's disability. In response, Arena tweeted a blog post that explained the changes to Ricky's disability were made to ensure they weren't, quote, perpetuating the trope of an able-bodied performer using mobility aids. The tweet didn't help. The backlash grew so intense that Arena eventually turned off comments on the post. But according to disability dramaturg Sydney Zarlengo, it's important to note that the controversy surrounding Ricky Potts and Yannick Robin Mirko's experience at McCarter extends past Ride the Cyclone itself.
But I think people have gotten so caught up in like the Ride the Cyclone drama that they've forgotten that this is not a Ride the Cyclone drama thing. This is what our industry looks like for disabled people right now.
According to the CDC, 1 in 4 Americans are disabled. And yet the first wheelchair-using actor on Broadway didn't happen until 2015 when Ali Stroker starred in Deaf West Spring Awakening. Though many disability dramaturgs and nonprofits like Theater Access NYC and the Autistic Theater Makers Alliance are working to remove stigma and increase accessibility on stages, the theater industry as a whole still has a way to go.
Do not take it personally when inaccessibility in your production, in your theater, in your writing, in anything is brought to your attention. Just accept that you are not the ableism that created this industry, but your show, your theater can be what ends it.
What happened to Yannick didn't happen because it was Ride the Cyclone. What happened to Yannick happened because this is what happens in every theater across the country right now. That's standard. You just heard about it because the show is a cult following on TikTok, and TikToks go viral very quickly.
And a lot of people at some point in their lives develop a disability or love someone who ends up developing or has a disability. We have to think about outside of ourselves and really consider what it really means that the stage can reflect our world, the full world, all of the world, the right way, the safe way.
The online backlash loomed over Ride the Cyclone's press night at Arena Stage on January 19th, 2023. That Monday, the reviews went live to the public. Only one review from Theaterly mentioned the changes to Ricky and the controversy involving Yannick Robin Mirko. The production was a critical and commercial hit. The rewrites to Ricky Potts became the official licensing script for community theaters, regional theaters, and school productions. So, what happens next? Nearly 20 years since its first performance in the basement of a Ukrainian church, Ride the Cyclone has managed to garner a die-hard following online, and continues to be a favorite for regional, community, and high school productions. And yet, despite its status as a viral phenomenon, Ride the Cyclone has yet to see a Broadway stage, and many still know nothing about it. All of which leads us back to the question, what is Ride the Cyclone? Ride the Cyclone is proof that good art shouldn't be judged on if it gets a marquee on Broadway or not. It should be judged on if it makes us feel and if it makes us think. Ride the Cyclone is a reminder that one shouldn't make art for the sole reason of fame or fortune. It should be made because they have something to say. On paper, this musical never should have worked. It dealt with an extremely taboo topic, using dark humor and music that didn't sound like a musical. And yet that's the very reason it does work. The creative team never intended for the show to be a commercial smash that pleased the traditional theater crowd. They weren't influenced by preconceived notions of what a musical should sound like. Instead, they pulled from everything else: pop, jazz, rap, and Supertramp. The result was a sound and story unlike any musical that came before it. But above all else, Ride the Cyclone is a lesson that the only way anything can improve is by failing, acknowledging the mistakes, and doing better the next time. So what is Ride the Cyclone? Ride the Cyclone is tragic. Ride the Cyclone is surreal. Ride the Cyclone is complicated. Its past is anything but simple. However, so is its future. Where the show goes from here is anyone's guess. All we can do is hold on tight. The coaster's been running for ages. We don't know how it started or why we're on it, but we strap in and ride.